This is my review of the Ace Pro, part 2 of 3. Low light video. Perhaps the biggest selling point of the Ace Pro has been the pure video mode, which does a lot of magic to improve filming in low light conditions. I wanted to see how it compares against the regular video mode and even the free frame mode. What you're watching now is the regular video mode. First, let's see if 1080p differs in any way from 4K at the same frame rate. Personally, I can't see much difference in the lighting, but the 4K footage does have more detail. So if the resolution doesn't affect the amount of light captured, let's see if changing frame rate does. The higher frame rate footage is noisier in the shadows, and though there's not any more detail in the dark areas, performance is considerably better in the portions of the frame where there is good lighting. Now we're looking at 1080p 25 with a 2x clarity zoom. What stands out is that the stabilization has worked well. Here I'm shaking the camera vigorously, and although it's not nice to look at, it does perform much better than I expected. This is clarity zoom enabled and disabled. The clarity zoom is definitely darker, picking up virtually no detail in the water. Switching over to pure video now, the scene does look brighter and more natural. We're shooting in 4K and there's definitely some detail, but not nearly as much as you'd find during daytime conditions. Shaking the camera vigorously still results in that annoying jitter, but there's no escaping that, and it's not nearly as bad as I expected for such extreme conditions. Pure video mode is definitely better than regular video mode in low light, even with a 2x clarity zoom. Here you can see that it's even able to pick up some detail in the water. This is free frame mode. Whilst the video looks alright, it's definitely not a low light mode. This is a good example of the direct comparison between regular video and pure video. If we pause it, you can immediately notice several differences. For example, this logo, the clarity of the window frame, this shop sign, the texture on the road, and many more. So the difference is real. Looking back one more time at the bridge, I have to say I'm quite pleased with the pure video mode. It is possible to get an acceptable shot in low light scenarios with a little care. This is a well lit up street, brighter than the last scene, but now we have to contend with the bounce in my step. Personally, I think other reviews have played up the capabilities somewhat, giving the impression that the jitter was a solved problem. But just because it's not perfect, it doesn't mean that it's not an improvement. As I'm walking down the street, I'm about to switch from pure video to regular video. Notice the difference in quality. If that wasn't clear, I'll try and highlight the differences now. Without a doubt, pure video is an improvement that I'd want enabled whenever I'm shooting in the dark. When the camera is fixed to a tripod, the differences are not as pronounced. Pure video is still brighter and has more detail, but I could live with the regular video footage. You might be wondering how this compares to a somewhat recent iPhone. This is an iPhone 12 Pro, the main lens. However, although it looks alright, comparing like for like means that we need to look at the wide-angle lens, in which case the iPhone is much worse. So it would seem that the free frame mode is really just a regular video mode with a bigger frame for more control over stabilization. And while pure video is a definite improvement, it has been overstated in some reviews. You still definitely need to take some care while shooting. A tripod is ideal in low light situations, but if you're going to be walking around with it, you need to take care to step softly. At the end of the day, this is still an action camera, but if this is all you've got, then it's better than anything else in the category. Slow motion. There's not a lot of interesting stuff happening here today, so I'll have to be creative in how I test this. Yes, the camera has slow motion, and generally it works well. 1080p will get you 240 frames per second, while 2.7K and 4K will get you up to 120. But watch now as we switch to 4K 120. Did you catch it? There again. And again. It looks like every now and then a single frame gets exposed incorrectly, creating a distracting flash. Here we see one again. And stepping through the frames one by one, this is what it looks like. I can't be sure what the reason is for this. Perhaps the rapid change of exposure is tricking the camera. I doubt it's related to the g-force of spinning, though I suppose it's impossible to know for sure. I hope Insta360 will fix this in a firmware update, but to be very frank, I don't expect to use the slow motion mode too much. As you might guess by now, the Ace Pro does quite well in low light too. Here's a tripod shot. There is some mild flickering, but this is a different sort from the daytime footage, most likely caused by the frame rate of 120 not being exactly divisible by the local power frequency of the nearby streetlight. I could have dropped this down to 100 frames per second, and most likely that would have solved the issue. Time-lapse mode. With time-lapses, the daytime image quality is excellent, which is to be expected. Once again, the nighttime scenario is the more interesting one to consider. Here you can see a few time-lapses that I took with varying amounts of light. I'm quite pleased with how they all came out in general, but more so given that they came from a tiny action camera. Any blurriness or shake you see here is a result of me accidentally moving the tripod, not issues with the camera itself. I think it's useful that the UI tries to guide you in selecting the right interval setting. TimeShift. TimeShift is basically a time-lapse video, but stabilized so as to make the framing less jarring. It's particularly effective when moving towards or away from a subject, as it smooths out the journey. There's not much to say about this mode because it works well. Again, it records to 4K 30, and the screen shows a crosshair to help you keep the subject centered. It's a cool effect, but probably won't see much use once the novelty wears off, because it simply takes too much effort, planning your path, pointing the camera, and hoping other people don't obstruct your view, than it's worth most of the time. Starlapse. The Starlapse mode really has the ability to make nighttime look like day. For context, here's what my iPhone 12 Pro captured, and real life was darker still. Unfortunately, this time of year is mostly cloudy in the UK, so these are the best shots I could manage. I suppose it's interesting to see how the camera deals with the stars being intermittently blocked, but only so as to confirm that it behaves as expected. Despite reducing the exposure length in half here, I still found the image a little bright for my taste, but then this is an urban setting. This one turned out much better, but you can see some phantom lights begin to appear. Some are planes, which get mostly ignored except for when the flight path crosses over a star trail. But I can only guess that these are the result of light being reflected off some wet leaves and confusing the algorithm. I'm sure you can fix this in post with a little creativity and elbow grease. But it's a shame that the workflow isn't completely seamless despite all the bragging around this camera having an AI chip, whatever that means. Though traditional star lapses are a setting you can opt for, all of the videos I'm showing you here are actually star trails. The camera saves every single frame as a JPEG by default and processes them at the end to create a short video file. This makes sense, but is annoying for two reasons. One, your memory card gets filled with thousands of image files that are cumbersome to manage. And two, you need to process them in order to create the trails. The camera does this well automatically in body, though there can be a lengthy wait time of several minutes. But quite likely, you will leave the camera running until it runs out of battery, and that process won't get a chance to run. In this case, the studio software is able to apply the processing in post, and, indeed, you can even use a third-party Astro software should you choose, possibly paired with shooting in RAW. Annoyingly, each frame in the sequence is named with a 3-digit sequence number, so if you take over 999 shots, then not only do the files get split over multiple folders, but also you will end up with more than one file having the same name. I'm sure this can be assembled into a star trail, with additional hackery if necessary, but I couldn't figure out how to do it on the Mac version of Studio. Having a 3-digit sequence number is a very poor choice, and I hope they fix this in a firmware update. One feature I love, which complements the Starlapse mode quite nicely, is that you can set it to start recording at a certain time of day. This means you can frame your shot earlier in the daytime and not have to go back outside once it's cold, dark, and you'd rather be sleeping. Regarding battery life performance, I found it to last in the region of 90 minutes. So if you're chasing a longer session, then you'll probably want to plug in a USB battery. But keep in mind that uncovering the USB port means the camera is no longer watertight, so check the forecast for rain. Photos. Photos are a strange thing to review here because I'm convinced the Ace Pro is primarily a video camera. Nevertheless, here are some shots taken in both high dynamic range and standard dynamic range. Notice the blown out sky. And these are low-light photos taken in both JPEG and RAW. As you can see, the noise reduction is pushed to an extreme, which looks awful up close but works when seen from a normal zoom level. The produced RAW file doesn't have the PureShot processing applied, which you can see here by the blown out highlights, but it does capture enough data to recover them in Lightroom. That's all for part 2 of the review. Be sure to subscribe if you want to be alerted when part 3 is uploaded.